September 19th, 1944. Dawn breaks over the village of Arracourt, Lorraine, France. Dense fog rolls across the farmland like a grey curtain, reducing visibility to less than 50 yards. In a shallow depression near the village, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams stands beside his M4 Sherman tank, listening. Through the fog comes a sound that makes every American tanker's blood run cold, the deep rumble of German Panther tanks. Abrams commands the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division. His men have been fighting almost non-stop since mid-July, rolling across France in General George Patton's legendary Third Army. They are exhausted, low on fuel, and their tanks are outgunned by the German armor now approaching through the fog. What none of them know yet is that they are about to fight the largest tank battle American forces have ever faced. A battle that will pit American ingenuity against German engineering, a battle where 75mm Shermans will face off against the most feared tanks in the German arsenal. A battle that military historians would study for decades, asking the same question: how did they win? The answer would prove that in tank warfare, the quality of the crew matters far more than the quality of the tank. 2 months earlier, on June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy. By August, they had broken through fierce German resistance and were racing across occupied France. Leading this advance was General George S. Patton's Third Army, a force of more than 160,000 men, 1,500 artillery guns, and 930 Sherman tanks. Spearheading Patton's assault was the 4th Armored Division under Major General John S. Wood. These were Patton's best tankers. They had been training together since 1941. They knew each other's voices over the radio. They could coordinate attacks without detailed orders. Patton's instructions to them were simple: go east and go like hell, and they did. Starting on August 16th, the 4th Armored Division advanced at speeds that seemed impossible for an armored formation. 20 to 25 miles per hour down French roads, bypassing German resistance, cutting supply lines, creating chaos in the German rear. One officer later recalled, "We were an avalanche of fire and movement. When we hit resistance that would take time, we just pulled back and bypassed." The tankers' byword was bypass and haul ass. The German army was in full retreat. Vastly outnumbered, suffering catastrophic losses, German units fought desperately as they withdrew. But American material superiority was overwhelming. As one German veteran put it, you could destroy 100 Shermans. There were 120 more. They never ran out of men either. By September 1st, the 4th Armored Division had crossed the Moselle River, the last natural barrier before Germany. They had advanced 328 miles in just 12 days. The tankers were euphoric. The German border was within striking distance. Victory seemed close. And then, on September 2nd, they stopped. No orders came. They sat. September 3rd, still nothing. On the 3rd day, they learned the reason: gasoline. The speed of their advance had outrun their own supply lines. The Third Army was out of fuel. Captain Jimmy Leach, commanding B Company of the 37th Tank Battalion, understood what this meant. "We knew that each day we didn't move, that was giving time to the enemy. Time is the most valuable commodity on the battlefield, and the Germans were masters at reorganizing. We thought we had a window of about 5 days. If we sat for 5 days, we were going to start hitting resistance." He was right. The Germans took full advantage of the lull, and what they were preparing would shock the Americans. In September 1944, Nazi Germany was losing the war on every front. Since the Allied invasion in June, Germany had lost 400,000 men in France. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets were pushing relentlessly toward Poland. The Third Reich was being crushed between two massive armies. But Adolf Hitler was not ready to concede defeat. He had one card left to play. Throughout 1944, German factories had been producing tanks in record numbers for the Eastern Front. Hitler diverted these newly manufactured tanks westward and created new formations called Panzer brigades. These brigades were equipped with 135 Panzer IV tanks and 280 Panther tanks, supported by more than 14,000 infantry called Panzer Grenadiers. The Panther was the most feared tank in the German arsenal. Protected by 80mm of frontal armor, it was almost invincible to head-on fire. Its 75mm KWK-42 cannon could penetrate a Sherman's frontal armor from 2,000 meters away. American tank crews called the Panther a death sentence. Hitler's plan was ambitious: encircle and destroy Patton's stalled Third Army, then advance northwest to drive a wedge into the Allied front lines. He chose General Hasso von Manteuffel to lead the counteroffensive. Manteuffel was a World War I cavalry officer and an expert in armored warfare, with an admirable combat record spanning 5 years. But Manteuffel's force had critical weaknesses. The new Panzer brigades consisted of inexperienced crews. Many were underage cadets, others were old men conscripted to fill the ranks of fallen soldiers. The tank crews had received minimal training. They had never worked together as units. They lacked reconnaissance elements to scout enemy positions. As one German officer later assessed, "We were fighting with our eyes covered. The enemy knows where you are, and you don't know where they are." Facing this German force was Combat Command A of the 4th Armored Division, led by Colonel Bruce Clark. Clark's forces were at full combat strength, motivated, well-equipped, and veteran. They had plenty of artillery support. Although older than the German tanks, the American force had more than 800 functional tanks. But there was one critical problem: the Sherman tank. The M4 Sherman was armed with a short-barreled 75mm gun, with an effective range of just 800 meters. It was protected by only 51 millimeters of frontal armor. Its gun had a lower muzzle velocity than the Panther and could not penetrate a Panzer IV's frontal armor at distances greater than 1,000 meters. Against a Panther, the disparity was even worse. Even at point-blank range, the Sherman's 75mm gun had trouble penetrating the Panther's front glacis. As one American tanker put it, "American tank crews used to say we Shermans are only suicide candidates against a Panther." But the Sherman had advantages the Germans did not appreciate. It was light and fast, able to reach speeds of up to 40 kilometers per hour. That speed made it the most maneuverable tank on the battlefield. It had a lower profile than the Panther, making it easier to conceal. And most importantly, American tank crews had been training together for years. The 4th Armored Division's tankers understood something fundamental. They couldn't win a fair fight against Panthers, so they wouldn't fight fair. On September 18th, under heavy fog, German armored units of the 111th Panzer Brigade attacked the town of Lunéville. The Americans were caught by surprise and lost tanks during the fight. Just as the Germans were about to surround them from the northeast and southeast, reinforcements arrived from the 4th and 6th Armored Divisions with a company of tanks and tank destroyers. The Germans retreated 1 day later, having lost more than 24 Panzers and around 1,000 men. American losses were also in the hundreds. Colonel Clark realized immediately that his planned offensive had just turned into a defensive operation. He retained his artillery near a fortified perimeter and consolidated all his units in Arracourt. Then he sent quick forays out at night to hit the fortified enemy-held towns and return fast inside the perimeter. The German 5th Panzer Army, having failed to take Lunéville, turned its attention to Arracourt. The real battle was about to begin. At 7:30 on the morning of September 19th, the German 113th Panzer Brigade emerged from dense morning fog and slammed into Combat Command A. The Americans had only one company of Sherman tanks forward, with a company of M10 tank destroyers in reserve. The Germans attacked with 4 companies of heavy Panther tanks, an assault gun company, and 2 battalions of Panzer Grenadiers. The fog provided the Germans with cover from Allied fighter bombers. It should have been a massacre, but the Americans detected the German advance before the tanks could engage. They prepared an ambush. This time the fog worked in favor of the Americans. Poor tactical deployment by the German tanks exposed their weaker side armor. Sherman tanks, using the fog as cover, flanked the Panthers and knocked out 11 Panzers in the opening engagement. A platoon of the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion had arrived near Arracourt to assist. Private Paul Colangelo was with them. After we realized they were German, we started to open fire. We would shoot and move. With our speed and maneuverability, we were having a field day. But the German Panthers quickly adapted. The Hellcat tank destroyers had speed, but their armor was only 13 millimeters thick. 3 of the 4 Hellcats were knocked out. Then Captain Tom Evans arrived with 4 more Hellcats. As the fog burned off, we saw at least 30 to 40 German tanks start up towards us in a frontal attack. We waited and waited, then we fired, The leading two tanks were hit and stopped dead in flames. The others, their crews apparently confused, turned sideways. That's where they made a big mistake. From our position, with only turrets showing, we hit 11 more as fast as we could load and shoot. It was a turkey shoot. By mid-afternoon, 8 Hellcats had knocked out 19 Panzers. But the Germans punched through American lines just outside Arracourt, threatening the headquarters of Combat Command A. Tank Commander Jimmy Leach and his company received an urgent call for help. The Germans had a couple of brigades of tanks attacking CCA. Leach's company arrived just in time. They found American headquarters caught off guard, defended by only a few artillery guns. The artillery was shooting direct fire at them and had them stymied. Clark said, "Where's your company? Get rid of those damn tanks right there." I said, "All right, deploy right out here in line formation and move toward these Germans." Guns ablazing. When the Shermans emerged, guns firing, the Germans retreated. But they didn't go far. Leach pursued. A company went around the left on high ground and dropped down. Here was a German lager of over a dozen Panther tanks. A company immediately started shooting at them. We lost 3 Shermans, a company lost its commander and 2 platoon leaders. A frontal attack against Panthers was suicide. Leach knew this. But a company's attack created an opportunity. Their armor protection was superior to ours. Their hit ability superior to ours. But we had the smoke round in the 70s. The advantage of the smoke round was to screen the target where he couldn't shoot back at you, blind him, and then try to maneuver to the flank and get a flank shot. A company's costly frontal assault allowed Leach's tanks to strike from the side, targeting the Panther's thinner, more vulnerable side armor. I hit them broadside. When I dropped over, we were right in the middle of them. If I'd have hit them on the front like a company did, they would have been bouncing off. But I hit them on the flank, and my guns would go right through the side of a German tank. Together, a company and Leach's company knocked out 9 Panthers. By the end of September 19th, the battlefield was littered with the hulks of 43 German Panzers. The Americans lost just 5 Shermans and 3 Hellcats. General Patton analyzed the day's fighting and concluded this was just a skirmish. He ordered the bulk of his forces to continue advancing northeast toward Germany. Jimmy Leach and his company were ordered to stay behind as rear guard near the French town of Moncourt. I was to be the rear guard as they pushed on away from me, Leach recalled. And suddenly to my right, the Germans reappeared. In spades and tanks again, the 111th Panzer Brigade was launching a surprise attack on the American rear. Leach began long-range firing, stalling the German advance. Then disaster struck. While Leach was dismounted, scouting the German position on foot, a Panther fired at his tank. They fired a second round and missed again. Why, I don't know, but Boggs, my driver, stopped. That was all the Germans needed. Now they got a steady target, and the third round went right through the right side of the tank. Knocked the head off my driver, Boggs, and cut Papovich, my bow gunner, in half. At that moment, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams engaged the Panther. His shot missed, but cut a furrow near the German tank, forcing it to withdraw. Abrams was already building a reputation as one of America's greatest tank commanders. He didn't lead from the rear. As Leach said, he was among the group of tanks that were in the attack. He was one of them. He could have been knocked out just like any one of us. While this ground battle raged, something extraordinary happened overhead. Major Charles Bazooka Charlie Carpenter, flying a tiny Piper L4 Cub observation plane, spotted a company of German Panther tanks moving into Arracourt. Carpenter had equipped his small plane with bazooka rockets mounted under the wings. Low clouds and thick fog initially made it difficult to see the enemy, but around noon the weather cleared. Carpenter launched a series of strikes against the German Panzers, dodging ground fire while firing all of his bazooka rockets in quick succession. He returned to base to reload and flew 2 more sorties that afternoon, launching 16 bazooka rockets at German tanks and armored cars. Several were hits. Ground troops later verified that Carpenter knocked out 2 Panther tanks and several armored cars that day. By nightfall on September 20th, the Germans had taken Moncourt and posed a threat to the American flank. Abrams made a bold decision. He would strike Moncourt at night. Night tank attacks violated all the rules of armored warfare, but it worked. Caught by surprise, the Germans were wiped out. With the skies clearing on September 21st, P-47 Thunderbolts of the 405th Fighter Group were able to launch relentless attacks on German ground forces. The German formations, lacking anti-aircraft protection, were devastated. On September 22nd, the Germans attacked again, taking advantage of the morning fog as they had on September 19th. They collided with American cavalry forces protecting the 4th Armored Division's main body. As one officer recalled, the cavalry was no match for the Panzers, but they kept the Germans at bay long enough for CCA to set up a defensive screen of tanks and tank destroyers. When the Germans broke through, the fog began to lift. They were exposed to the full force of the American defense, tanks, supported by numerous artillery batteries, and squadrons of aircraft. What followed was, in the words of one witness, an inferno of fire. Panzer Brigade 111 was practically annihilated. One unit in particular stood out, the 37th Tank Battalion, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams. From September 19th to 22nd, the 37th spread confusion and terror in the German rear. At Mayenvik, they lost 14 Shermans, while knocking out 55 Panthers and Tigers. On September 22nd, the M4s of the 37th swept south again through Coincourt and Buris to the Rhine-Marne Canal. The desperate Wehrmacht launched counterattack after counterattack, but as the toll of Panthers mounted, the attacks waned in intensity and eventually ceased. German forces regrouped and prepared for another assault. This time, they brought their heaviest weapon, the Tiger I tank. The Tiger was one of Germany's biggest and most fearsome tanks. Its 100mm of frontal armor made it virtually impregnable at long range. Its 88mm cannon could destroy a Sherman at a distance of more than 2 kilometers. As one officer put it, the Tiger has the best gun that was created in World War II, the 88, which makes it a fearful weapon. On the morning of September 24th, it was another foggy day, gray, miserable, raining, ceiling zero. Shermans of the 8th Tank Battalion were defending the town of Château-Salins. One commander later recalled, "At first light we looked out at this big patch of woods, and out of the woods started coming tanks. These were mostly Panthers, but interspersed were Tiger tanks. The Americans opened fire immediately. The minute they came into range, we started firing everything we had at them. Massive fire as they came out. What our tanks would do. They'd rise, go up the hill just high enough so the gun was above the ridge, fire 2 or 3 rounds, move back, then move to the side. It was a dangerous game. The moment an American tank stopped moving, an 88mm round would come screaming in. The most terrifying sound I've ever heard is an 88 hitting the ridge and ricocheting off. It's a deafening, frightening sound. The battle seesawed back and forth. American tanks were being lost. German tanks were being destroyed. At one point it was almost a tie, and then suddenly there was a crack in the sky. A little daylight appeared through the clouds. Down came the tactical air force. They had apparently been flying overhead waiting for an opening, the commander recalled. The minute they saw this little opening, down they came. They started hammering away, strafing and bombing. Boy, we can't give them enough credit for the way they operated in support of us. At that point, the Germans had had enough. The ones still able to function moved back. The Battle of Arracourt continued for 5 more days. But Hitler's armored brigades could not break the stubborn American defenders. By September 29th, the Germans retreated back toward the Rhine. The statistics told the story. In less than 2 weeks of fighting, the Germans lost approximately 285 tanks and assault guns, almost 75% of their original force. Thousands of men were killed, wounded, or captured. The 2 new Panzer brigades were completely wiped out. German veteran Heinz Altmann later reflected, "It went badly for several reasons. One was completely inexperienced top leadership. The whole planning at the time was so makeshift. There was such poor coordination. We didn't have any training. We didn't even know each other. That was one of the major disadvantages of these new Panzer brigades. For the Americans, the victory came at a price. 225 men were killed. 648 were wounded. 41 Sherman tanks and 7 Hellcat tank destroyers were lost." But the 4th Armored Division had cemented its reputation as America's elite armored force. For the rest of the war, they would be known as Patton's vanguard. Adolf Hitler, dissatisfied with the outcome, relieved the commander of Army Group G. But the Germans believed, despite their heavy losses, that they had succeeded in stopping Patton's advance. And in a sense, they had. The Third Army came to a halt. But it wasn't the German counterattack that stopped Patton. It was a strategic decision by Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower to divert fuel supplies to other forces. The delay allowed the German army to regroup and prepare defenses along the Siegfried Line. Patton's window of opportunity to drive into Germany had closed. General Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, the 5th Panzer Army's Chief of Staff, later wrote, "On 21st September, it looked as though the Americans were determined to force their way through to the Saar and the Rhine, and General Patton might well have done so if he had been given a free hand." At that time, the West Wall was still unmanned, and no effective defense could have been made there. The Battle of Arracourt became the largest tank battle U.S. forces fought on the Western Front until the Battle of the Bulge. It has been studied at military academies for decades as a demonstration of how tactical situations and crew quality can be far more important factors in determining the outcome of a tank battle than the technical merits of the tanks themselves. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams went on to become one of the most celebrated American armored commanders of World War II, eventually rising to Army Chief of Staff in the 1970s. The M1 Abrams tank, the current main battle tank of the U.S. Army, is named in his honor. For the tankers who fought at Arracourt, the memory remained vivid decades later. One veteran reflected, "It gave us notoriety in the Corps and in Third Army. It was a significant victory because we became extremely well-versed in anti-tank warfare and tank versus tank warfare. We did a beautiful job of keeping the pressure on. Looking back now, unbelievable. But I'm very proud that I've been there. If I'd be asked to do it again, I would do it. I can't believe I was there. I can't believe I did what I did." It's a very strange feeling. Today, in the region of Lorraine, France, few traces of the Battle of Arracourt remain. The fields are peaceful, the forests quiet, but if you know where to look, you can still find relics. A 75mm shell wedged between tree trunks, rusting hulks buried in the undergrowth, the scars of war slowly being reclaimed by nature. In 2000, the town of Arracourt acquired a Sherman tank of the same type that fought there, a memorial to maintain the memory of those who fought and to show gratitude for the freedom that generations secured. The battle proved something essential about warfare, that courage, training, and tactical ingenuity can overcome superior technology, that American tankers in obsolete Shermans could defeat German crews in state-of-the-art Panthers when they fought on ground of their own choosing, using tactics that negated the enemy's advantages. The fog that should have protected the German advance instead concealed American ambushes. The superior range of Panther guns became irrelevant in close-quarters fighting. The heavier armor of German tanks meant nothing when Sherman struck from the flank. American speed and maneuverability proved more valuable than German firepower and protection. September 1944, Arracourt, Lorraine, a small town in northeastern France where 75mm Shermans faced 75mm Panthers and won decisively, where American crews proved that in armored warfare, the man matters more than the machine, where Andrew Jackson Higgins's boats had landed soldiers on beaches, Creighton Abrams's tanks drove them toward victory. Different weapons, same American spirit, practical, adaptable, relentless. The war would continue for 8 more months, but at Arracourt, in those fog-shrouded fields of Lorraine, the outcome was no longer in doubt.